Ava Homa is a journalist and award-winning author of Daughters of Smoke and Fire, a novel that won the 2020 Nautilus Book Award. She holds an MA in English and Creative Writing from the University of Windsor and an MA in English Language and Literature from Tehran, Iran. Ava has spoken about women's rights across North America and Europe. Her words have appeared in the Globe and Mail, the BBC, and the Guardian. She has addressed the UN and European forums on the struggle of Kurdish women in their search for justice and freedom, and the act of writing as resistance. She'll be reading from Daughters of Smoke and Fire, and also from her new novel, Silence Between the Notes.
Really happy to be speaking to all of you today. As Keith mentioned, I'll be reading a short excerpt of Daughters of Smoke and Fire. What's special is that what I'll be reading for you today, I've never read in public before. He reassures me that today's audience are very special and they can take what I'm here to offer you with. I've heard you guys have a lot of curiosity and openness and compassion.
Yes, thank you.
Just two words. Bapir, that you will hear, is in Kurdish means grandpa. And there's a breakfast sandwich let's talk about here, which is something I was fed when I was a kid. We called it a bulletproof sandwich, which was basically just honey and ghee is clarified butter. I didn't question it as a kid, why we had to have a sandwich that's called bulletproof, and how and why that would make us run faster than the bullets. But now in the safety of Canada, I look back at it and I'm reminded of what a compassionate way to prepare a kid for the world that he enters. So this is the story. When his grandpa drew a yogurt mustache above Alan's lips, the boy dissolved into giggles. Picturing himself with real whiskers thrilled Alan, who thought that facial hair might make up for being shorter than the other boys in his class. Your laughter woke me up, you cheeky monkey. Uncle Soran, youngest of the 6 uncles and the only one awake, tousled Alan's hair as he came onto the patio that opened to the yard. They sat around the nylon cloth spread atop the crimson handmade rug to eat breakfast. Alan laughed again. Bapir, I want handlebars, please. With a chapped finger, Bapir curled the end of the yogurt mustache on either side of Alan's puckered up lips and planted a dab of the stuff on his nose too. Alan collapsed into laughter. That June morning in 1963, Alan decided that Bapir was the most amusing person on earth. Grandma brought out more naan, the thin, round bread she had baked in the cylindrical clay oven dug into the basement. Alan made his own bulletproof sandwich, fresh honeycomb mixed with ghee. After I eat this, I can run faster than the bullets, he said. Father had come to Soleimani to publish an article he had written with Uncle Soran, illustrating the suffering of the working class in Kurdistan and the rest of Iraq. Kurds had settled in the Zagros Mountains 300 years before Christ was born, but now Alan's people had no country to call their own. When the Western allies had drawn the map of the Middle East, they had cut Kurdistan into 4 pieces, dividing it among Iran, Iraq, Turkey, and Syria. To visit Bapir with his father, Alan had to ace Kurdish spelling, but Kurdish was not a subject taught at school. Arabic was the only language used there. That morning, Father had skipped breakfast to search the city for a contraband typewriter. Across the yard, Grandma was watering the pink roses and white lilies. A pounding on the wooden gate in the cement wall that surrounded their plot of land shattered her concentration. She dropped the hose. I'll get it. Alan ran across the yard to save her the trouble, but before he reached the gate, 6 men in Iraqi army uniforms, their faces hidden by a striped gray scarf, broke the lock and directed their Kalashnikovs at Grandma's face. "Where are they?" the shortest one demanded. Bapir froze, a morsel of food still in his open mouth. Alan turned to see Uncle Soran leaping over the wall and clambering onto the neighbor's roof. Somebody, Grandma, grabbed Alan and backed him toward the house. Nestled against her bosom, Alan watched the soldiers invade the house without waiting for an answer. All 6 uncles were pulled from their beds and hauled from the bathroom, the basement, a closet, and off the roof next door. Alan wiped off his white handlebars with his sleeve and tried to make sense of the chaos, the jerky movements, the incomprehensible noises escaping people's throats. If only his eyes would give him weapons instead of tears. His uncles were dragged by their necks, screaming and struggling like animals to slaughter. Bapir's questions and prayers, Grandma's cries and pleas, the neighbors' screams and curses, nothing had the slightest effect on the soldiers who conducted the raid without a reply. Alan's uncles, some still in undershirts, were marched out at gunpoint to army truck carrying hundreds of Kurdish boys and men between the ages of 14 and 25. Alan peeled himself from Grandma's arms and ran to the street. The men were told to squat in the beds of the trucks, to place their hands on their heads, and to shut their mouth. Alan looked back at Bapir, who remained next to his smashed gate, heads bowed. Along with other children, women, and elderly, Alan chased after the lumbering trucks, their huge rubber tires kicking up clouds of dust as they carted away the men amid the anxious cries of the followers. Alan trailed after the truck carrying his uncles as it traveled up the hillside at the city center. His heart had never beaten so fast. The truck finally stopped at the top of the hill and prisoners were shoved out. On the hard soil, the captives were each given a shovel and ordered to dig. The angry bystanders were ordered to stand back. People obeyed the AK-47s. Dirt sprayed over the prisoners' bodies, hairs, and eyelashes as their shovels cracked the earth open. Sweat dripped down their faces and tears ran down over hands that muffled sobs. Alan looked at the pee running down the pants of a boy next to him, at a woman behind him clawing at her face and calling God, 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 God. At an older man shaking uncontrollably, his hands barely holding onto his cane. Alan did not seem to be in possession of his own frozen body. Once the trenches were dug, half of the prisoners were ordered to climb down into the ditches, and the rest were forced to shovel dirt to their friends' and relatives' chins. Alan searched through the crowd to find Uncle Soran lifting a pile of dirt with his shovel. Soran's grip loosened when he looked into the eyes of his brother, Hiwa, whose name meant hope. Hiwa stood in the hole waiting to be buried by his closest relative, a man with whom he had play wrestled as a boy and confided in throughout his life. "Do it, Soran, do it," he said, his eyes shining up from the hole. A bearded soldier dressed in camouflage saw Soran's hesitation. "Dog, son of a dog!" He barked and swung his Kalashnikov at Soran, the barrel slicing the skin under his left ear. Soran growled, almost choking, as he turned. With his shovel, he batted the Kalashnikov away so that the gun hit its owner in the head, cutting his skull. Alan flinched. Bullets rained down from every direction. Soran crumbled. His blood sprayed over Hiwa, who was screaming and reaching for the perforated body, pulling him forward, pressing his face to the bleeding cheek of his brother. Crying out, Bapir tried to run toward his son, but dozens of guns pointed at his chest, dozens of hands held him back. The shower of gunfire wouldn't cease. It struck the siblings, painting them and the soil around them red. His uncles, still in one another's arm, were buried in one hole. Half of the prisoners were still covered up to their chins with dirt. The remaining 95 men were sent down into the other trenches, and the soldiers buried them up to their heads. Alan stared at the rows upon rows of human heads, a garden of agony. Intoxicated with power, the soldiers kicked the exposed heads of the prisoners, knocked some with the butts of their guns, and jeered at them. At the top of the hill, Bapir sobbed with such force that his wails shook the earth. Alan felt. He clutched Bapir's hunched shoulder and felt impossibly small. A sunburned man and a neighbor with shrunken features hugged Bapir, then placed the old man's trembling arms around their shoulders and walked him down the hill. Where are my other sons? Bapir gasped for air. Let's get you home, the neighbors told him. Alan wanted to go with his grandpa, but he was afraid to move. If he took a step, the nightmares would become real. He scanned the hill for his other uncles who were perhaps buried in some distant trench and unable to move. He couldn't see them. Even Bapir was no longer in sight. The hubbub was dying down. The strangers who had witnessed the scene were bound by their dread. Their exchanged looks, the only solace they could offer each other. Their heads seemed to move in slow motion, as if everyone was suspended underwater. Alan breathed in the atmosphere of quiet horror, of paused hysteria. Suddenly, people cried out in terror. From the road below them, several armored tanks were approaching. Gaping in disbelief, Alan staggered back, holding a hand to his mouth. He could neither run away nor slow his hammering heart, which was now threatening to explode. When the panicking crowd pushed forward, guns fired into the air to hold them back. The tanks advanced. Thank you for listening. So the rest of the story.
Yes, go on.
So the rest of the story is in Daughters of Smoke and Fire. This is the cover. HarperCollins Canada did a really good job of designing it and giving a very beautiful book out. For those of you who love to travel and see the rest of the world and feel like Iran and Kurdistan is not a place that's easily accessible for you, this will be one way for you to travel and feel the scenes and the scents. It's not all horror. Of course, this was, like I said, the most difficult few pages of the book, but I hope it will give you a chance to understand the complexity of life in Iran, the protests, the morality police, the women movement, and so much more that people have been showing a curiosity to understand, but they don't necessarily have access to.
Thank you so much for that, Ava. I do have to ask the question: are your passages based on true events?
Yes, every detail in the book, every detail, from what the radio announces, what the TV show might face, what the character might see on the street, all of them are based on historically correct research. So you can trust the event. The characters are fictional, but the events are true.
Kurdistan, after World War I, was divided up. It was the Kurds were not given a homeland. They were divided up between, is it Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Turkey. Has there, in the last year or two, even been any kind of improvement in the negotiations between Kurds and those four governments?
Well, a lot has changed since the First World War. In the beginning, as humanity moved into the age of nation states from having empires, and Kurds were denied what the other groups in the Middle East, namely Arabs, Turks, and Persian had. Kurds were denied a state of their own. So the idea initially was, if we do have our own country, we would be safe from oppression. But 100 years from that time, with the impossibility of fighting four powerful states at once, Kurds have come to this practical sense of trying to work within the borders of the places they live in. And so I think that the improvement is that Kurds realize having a state is a means to an end. It's not the end in itself. What they want is equality and justice, and not necessarily exchanging a Persian dictator with a Kurdish dictator. The dream of having an independent state is not completely dead, but it's not practical, and more people come to realize that. In the context of Iran specifically, after this protest, Kurds have been willing to work with the rest of Iran in bringing democracy and justice to their country, and asking for autonomy more than independence.
I found on reading the portion of your new novel that it complements this, as horrible, horrific, and brutal as the passage was. This new novel offers an insight. It's an excellent continuation, if you will, complement. I'm wondering if you are ready to go and to read the rest. Read from the new novel.
Yes, I'll be happy to share a couple pages from Silence Between the Notes, which is a novel I have completed. I think in a little bit, in a couple of weeks, I'll be ready to look for literary representations. And I'm happy for this chance to share again one thing that I have never shared in public before. So Connie is a musician. This one is set in America because I wanted to look at the relationships between basically the effects of U.S. foreign policy on the Kurdish experience. Connie is a young woman, a Yazidi survivor of ISIS kidnapping, and she lives and works in California. Connie once stood whole as an individual and a member of her tribe, green and golden, like the meadows and mountains of her faraway homeland. She danced like a whirling dervish with her hands up to the sky, golden ribbons shimmering on her chestnut pigtails. She grew up chasing butterflies among the wildflowers of Mount Shingal and climbing the ancient fig and walnut trees of her front yard. Her ancestors loved their land and were nurtured by it century after century until the war. Ever since the highlands of her life turned into dust 5 years ago, she had been only a fraction of a human, endlessly reinventing her colors according to her surroundings, camouflaging like her favorite octopus at the Monterey Bay Aquarium where she now worked. Gone were the flirtatious wings in her dark blue eyes, the genuine smile on her lips, the subtle sway in her hip. The sun sauntered down the Monterey Bay Peninsula in March 2019, showering the clouds with shades of purple, amusing the guests on the patio of the Mirage Hotel restaurant. Connie collected the tip her last customer had left on the table and did the math. She needed $275 by the end of the week to pay her rent. A tap on her shoulder. "Table 29 asked for you," said John, the restaurant manager who wore too much cologne. He left quickly to say something to the new and anxious server who still had a lot to learn. Hired for her body, denied training, and humiliated for her lack of skills. Connie knew the drill. She had been through it. She took a deep breath and counted to 9 as she let go of the stagnant air she had been holding. 29 of her family members had been killed. Table 29 demanded her service. She turned 29 last week. The man who had asked for her wasn't a regular. He was in his late 60s and had reserved the best view, but his back was to the ocean. The clientele of this posh restaurant, seemingly from all over the world, had one thing in common: residency in the exclusive country of wealth. The odd patterns of this man's old-fashioned suit, however, made him look like an expatriate craving a taste of his former life, longing to prove that he used to be somebody. Connie knew that urge only too well. After some chit-chat, he asked, "So, where's that accent from? You're European? Russian?" Connie's shoulders slumped. The usual request: to draw her limits and borders, to squeeze herself into boxes that lethargic minds demanded to classify humans like they'd organize a closet based on color and utility. How would they categorize a stateless Yazidi without asking for a history lesson anyway? She waved a hand. "Oh, what difference does it make?" He reclined and chewed gum, trying too hard to look chill. "You're a model? 'Cause you could be. Easier than this, better pay." His pink face and damp hair showed off his spotty, which in this hotel cost more than Connie's bi-weekly paycheck. "That's funny." She mustered a smile, but her eyes refused to cooperate. He let out clipped cackles. His eyes were broken-hearted, or lonely, or both. "I'm serious, you must be 22, 24 max, and 5'8". His appraising eyes incised Connie's nerves. The sky cried blood as the sun disappeared behind the ocean. She shifted on her feet and played with her fake diamond ring, swallowing her barks. If only she didn't need the tips. "Would you like to start with a drink?" He looked the menu up and down. "How's that cocktail? The Big Little Lies?" Seasoned. She clasped her hands behind her apron. "One of our most popular. Any appetizers?" He leaned in, refusing to give up. "So you're not a model?" "Absolutely not." Rage struck her chest like a thunderstorm. Her body was hers, no longer for sale. "Ah, you must have been born to a model then." He raised a finger, proud of solving his own puzzle. She reached inside her pocket and squeezed the small black stone she had brought all the way from home. Feeling the soft surface of the stone against its firmness helped her to not lash out. "Oh, look, right behind you, a bunch of seals are jumping up." He turned for a moment. The lotions from his facial treatment were stuck between the wrinkles of his neck. In a blink, his eyes were drilling into her again. "I could hook you up with a modeling agency." "I'll be back with your cocktail shortly." "Wait, let's have a photo." His foot hit the table leg with a thud. To avoid breaking a plate on his brainless head, she picked up her pace and sought shelter at the server's corner. The small back room with fluorescent strip lights were filled with piles of trays and silverware that had to be polished. Connie placed her cheek and hand on the cold window and stared at the gentle waves, taking in the ocean so she'd feel balanced again. Her sigh blurred her vision. "Forget about your table," John texted. "Do not come back on the patio." "What happened?" she wrote back. No answer. The familiar stern darkness pressed down on her chest. Gosh, not again, not now. She needed to be in her best mood tonight and offer very big smiles. Seasoned at tackling anxiety, Connie closed her eyes and summoned her missing fiancé, Kayvan. "I know about everything that hurts, darling," he whispered. "But tell me, what do you love?" That's what they'd ask each other at stressful time. How about right now? What do you love right this moment? There was always an answer, often several. She listened to the farthest sounds. I love the whooshing sound of the waves when they retreat on the pebbles. Do you hear it? John opened the door. You can go home now. We'll talk later. What? Why? No. She had been hired as a hostess 3 years ago when she was new in the US and was promoted before she was ready. English still ice-like in her mouth, despite years of speaking it. She had many hiccups in the beginning, but John had announced only last month that Connie was one of his top servers. John put on an authoritarian face like a see-through mask. That customer of yours made a scene. She clenched her apron. Well, my job description didn't say I'm going to take photos of creeps. He complained he didn't understand your accent. Nonsense! Connie knew well what it was all about. Sounding like a refugee while looking like a model had betrayed his fetish. You can stand at the hostess desk. That's all I can offer. But that meagerly hour rate would not pay her bills. Only tonight? We'll have to see. I can't promise anything. Really, John? You demote me because of a racist prick? I'm running a business here, not a charity, all right? A charity. A charity. She took off her apron and threw it at the indifferent wall. This is not even justice, let alone charity. Because if his country had not backstabbed hers, she wouldn't have ended up waiting on bigots. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Ava. There's two of them. I think I'd like to open it up now and ask if anyone has any questions. Yes, we have a question here.
It's Mary.
Mary.
How has your life been since you've made a new home in Canada? Because this must be a very poignant experience, both writing about intergenerational trauma and possibly, I don't want to presume, but maybe having experienced it yourself.
How's my life been since I am living in Canada? How much time do we have? It's been healing. It's been healing. If I were to say it in one word, Canada gave me the peace that allowed me to question and examine things that I couldn't when I was in Iran, because while I was there, all I did was to survive. And once you're no longer just surviving, then comes a chance to grow, to examine, to expand, to heal, to help others along the way. That is a little bit of generalization, because even within an oppressive society, because I'm a little bit wary of representation of the Middle East, which is either demonization or complete romanticization. And what I try to offer in Daughters of Smoke and Fire is something that's realistic and in between, because there's a lot between these two ways of presenting life in Iran. Even then, despite everything, there's a lot of joy, there's growth. I often say that with grief comes a depth of soul that's rare in this world. In communities like the community that I grew up as a Kurd in Iran, there's a lot of, a very strong sense of community, a lot of compassion, and a very strong sense of taking care of each other. Here, there is a strong sense of self-care, but I feel like we're missing in that sense of let's take care of each other. So dealing with trauma, whether it's intergenerational or it's something that's developed in your own life, is its own story. But if we put that aside, because I see even people in the safety of North America, they develop all sorts of trauma. I often think of my experience at living in the east and the west side of the planet as having had access to left and right side of collective human brain. And I want to remind us that East also has a lot to offer in terms of flavor, beauty, depth, poetry, and all of that. And we will have a beautiful world if we could take the safety and practicality and efficiency of the West to the East and take the collective culture and the kindness and the flavors of the East back here. So that's what my dream is for humanity. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, you did. Thank you so much. That was a beautiful way to end. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but this was terrific. Thank you very much for your time and your work, and we loved it. So.
Thank you. I really appreciate you listening. Once again, Daughters of Smoke and Fire is available as ebook, audiobook. It's at all the libraries across Toronto and in your favorite bookstores. I hope you'll pick up your copy and travel to Iran through this book. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye, Ava.